Hello, I'm Pastor Greg Anderson from Trinity Lutheran Church in Grand Prairie. Greetings from the 55th parallel. This coming Sunday is a feast day for a particular saint, and kind of a familiar saint. And so, given the season that's coming up, if you're worried about, your kids finding out things that you don't want them to find out from the pastor, well, be warned. The feast day on Sunday is for St. Nicholas of Myra. And St. Nicholas, yes, that's St. Nicholas, is an interesting character. He is a historic figure. We know that there was a Nicholas. We know that he was Bishop of Myra. But actual historical records are a little thin. But there's some interesting stories about him that inform his reputation and kind of the mythology that followed. And one story I think is kind of entertaining in a weird, maybe unpastoral way. St. Nicholas's day on Sunday commemorates his death in 343, having been born on the 15th of March in 270. Myra is in Turkey. The present day Myra is Demre. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Demre. In what is now Turkey on the southern Mediterranean coast. A note regarding scripture study: if you're reading in the New Testament and come across the location of Asia Minor, in your brain translate to Turkey. So in this case, Myra or Demre, Turkey, is where St. Nicholas was bishop, and the area actually he was from. St. Nicholas is also known as Nicholas the Wonder Worker. There are a great deal of miracles that are attributed to him. He is the patron saint of many categories. I'm going to read some to you. It's an interesting list. St. Nicholas is the patron saint of sailors, merchants, archers, repentant thieves, prostitutes, children, brewers, pawnbrokers, unmarried people, and students in various locations in the world. There's a longer list, actually. He's also the patron saint of Galway, of Aberdeen, some of the locations of my people. But as I said, it's interesting that there's not a lot historically known about Nicholas that is reputable. That's attested to. It's hotly debated, partly because of the period of time. But tradition does have a lot to say about Nicholas. He was born to wealthy parents, Christian parents, and when they died, the tradition is that he gave all of his inheritance to the poor. There are these three stories I want to share with you about St. Nicholas. The first is the roots of some of, again, the mythology about St. Nicholas that'll be important later. It's also a very troubling story in a lot of ways. As I said, after his parents died, he gave his money to the poor and continued to have a heart for the poor, and did whatever he could, whenever he could, to better their lot. There's the story told of a devout man who was once quite wealthy, but had lost all of his money, and he had 3 daughters. Now, in this period of time, in order for your daughter to be married, you had to offer a dowry. There was money involved. It was a contractual arrangement, and you had to have money to make that happen. He had 3 daughters and had no money, and so no dowries. And the tradition at the time was that they would go unmarried, and eventually it was not uncommon for unmarried women to end up in prostitution. Hence Nicholas's status of patron saint of prostitutes. So this this father and in some ways these daughters faced a terrible future. St. Nicholas, it says, heard of their plight. And so at night, in secret, he took a bag of gold and dropped it in a window. The father used that bag of gold to offer dowry for his daughter, and his daughter, oldest daughter, was married. When she was married, then a second bag of gold appeared, and the second daughter was married. As the story goes, this father then pledged himself to watch for whoever this benefactor was, and indeed, for the third daughter, as the bag of gold was being dropped in the window, caught St. Nicholas in the act and expressed to him his gratitude. And indeed, this third daughter was able to be married. And so this gifts at night tradition came around in Dutch traditions. This has turned into a practice of leaving shoes outside the door, where gifts would be placed, and those other stories that grow from secret gifts. Second story, a little shorter, I promise, has to do with the why he is the patron saint of sailors. There's a couple stories about that, but this one in particular, that there were 3 sailors who were facing execution. There are various stories that lead us to this point, but these sailors or men were facing execution for things they didn't do. And St. Nicholas is said to have intervened. He appears quite miraculously, pushes the executioner's sword to the ground, releases the sailors from their chains, and declares their freedom, and actually chastises a juror who apparently accepted a bribe to make this whole sentencing happen. There are other stories of Nicholas calming the waters during a storm, again attributing to his patronage of sailors. The third story I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to be real honest with you, these are from Wikipedia. They have kind of the most detail. I did a lot of research, honest, and they kind of summarize the stories pretty well. I invite you to Google St. Nicholas of Myra. There are a number of St. Nicholases. Make sure you get the Myra part, M-Y-R-A. But Wikipedia does a nice job. So credit where credit's due. The third story about St. Nicholas revolves around the Council of Nicaea. These councils were called, and bishops were called together in the early church to decide matters of faith. The Council of Nicaea is important because out of it comes what we know as the Nicene Creed. Interesting story about creeds. The creeds are like the Gospels. The last message I gave, Sunday message I gave, I talked a bit about Mark as the earliest gospel because it's the shortest. We know that the Apostles' Creed of the 3 ecumenical creeds is the oldest because it's the shortest. Again, stories don't get shorter, they get longer. The first creed, of course, was rather simple. In Greek, it was 2 words. Jesus is Lord. That's all you had to believe. The Apostles' Creed is a little longer. The biggest chunk has to do with Jesus. If you compare the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, or technically the Niceo-Constantinopolitan Creed, yes, I paid a lot of money for that education. That creed has an extensive section on Jesus, a bit more on the Holy Spirit. And when a bit of the creed gets longer, that means that's what's being debated. That's the controversy. And at the Council of Nicaea, Christology, the study of Jesus Christ, was a hot topic. Who was Jesus? How did he fit into the Trinity? There were a number of things that were debated, and tradition says that Nicholas was there. Likely, historically, he would have been as a bishop. He is not included in a lot of the lists of attendees, which seems odd. But again, in this period of time, I mean, who really knows? One of the main characters in at the Council of Nicaea was Arius. You're supposed to say that name with kind of a foreboding. Arius. Arius has historically been deemed a heretic. It's a label, not to get too controversial, but it's a label that was kind of basically by vote. If you had the most people at the council, you got to decide who was in and who was out. Church historians take a deep breath. It's okay. But Arius was kind of the key character. Again, as history is written by the victors, the people who held sway at the Council of Nicaea, Arius was the villain. The story goes, and it's a very unpastoral thing I like about this story, is that the story goes that Nicholas, in the midst of the debate, got so upset with Arius that he approached him and punched him in the mouth. Now, some historians, and I know Wikipedia says, slapped him. Well, okay, slap, fine. This cost Nicholas. He was defrocked. He was debishoped, but restored later. But again, this picture of these councils, we get the impression of staid, learned bishops sitting around, and in some ways it was less parliament and more MMA apparently. But this was Nicholas. He was a bit impulsive. He was certainly kind. I like the fact that the story about the gold coins and the daughters, that he sought to give these gifts in secret. Speculation is that he was trying to save the father embarrassment, or the family embarrassment in their need for charity, having been wealthy at one point. But it has something, it has a hint of the don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Like giving in secret and not for reward or for reputation. It's not a bad lesson, I think. In these days, and again, these days is kind of code for pandemic, and in Alberta anyway, we're having a very difficult time. Numbers are growing dramatically, and it's scary. And I think one of the ways we can handle the fear, well, two things. One is looking at people like Nicholas, looking at people who can be examples to us. What can we do? What can we do to handle this fear? And we can give. Give as we are able. Give in secret, perhaps. But give. Provide emotional support for those we love, or maybe people we don't know that we hear about. One of the ways we can do this is the Salvation Army this is the time for their kettle program. And some of you, I know locally, I've seen the kettle people out and with the bells and the kettles, and now the technology where you can use a credit card and tap, you don't have to touch anything, and tap and give a donation. That's a way you can help people you don't know, but people we know that are in need. This pandemic has increased that number and not decreased. And so the Salvation Army can very much use your help. Financially and physically, they need volunteers. They need people to sit at these kettles. So if you Google Salvation Army in Grand Prairie or Salvation Army where you are, and help as you can, that would be wonderful. The other way this handles fear, I think, is to remember that we are not unique in this fear. 100 years ago, there was a pandemic and a world war going on. And so, what are some of the examples there? I was reading a meme the other day of that they were marketing shaving cream with Lysol in it. as a remedy to the pandemic. That people needed to stay home during the Spanish flu, and so that was used in the advertising of record players and board games. The other way we can handle the fear is to do something. We need to take this virus seriously because it takes us very seriously. And what is it that we can do to, again, be kind to our neighbors, to be gentle with one another? And so be creative. Think of ways that you can be helpful, and think of ways that you can use that being helpful to take care of this fear and apprehension. It's not going to get rid of it. It's scary. It should be scary. And but we can I think handle this together. We can find ways to channel that fear into generosity and into a kind of spiritual comfort that comes from remembering that we are not alone now, and we have people in history that we can rely on and see how they handled difficult circumstances as well. And so, as always, be well, be safe, and God bless you.